In June 2024, a routine traffic case in Providence Municipal Court became an international incident that would test the boundaries of diplomatic immunity, end a distinguished ambassador's career, and prove that some crimes are so egregious that even international treaties cannot shield perpetrators from consequences. This is the story of Dmitri Volkov, the son of a Russian ambassador who believed diplomatic immunity made him untouchable, and Judge Frank Caprio, who proved him wrong. It was 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in downtown Providence. School had just let out, and children were walking home along busy streets. Michael Torres, a 34-year-old fourth-grade teacher, approached a crosswalk near Lincoln Elementary School. The pedestrian signal showed the white walking figure. Traffic had stopped at the red light. Michael stepped into the crosswalk. What happened next was captured by multiple traffic cameras and would become the centerpiece of an international legal confrontation. A black Mercedes-Benz, traveling at approximately 80 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone, ran the red light without slowing. The driver made no attempt to brake. The vehicle struck Michael Torres with devastating force, throwing him 15 feet through the air. He landed hard on the pavement, his body crumpling on impact. The Mercedes continued for another 50 feet before coming to a stop. The driver's door opened. A young man in expensive European clothing stepped out. He was tall, well-groomed, and moved with the casual confidence of someone who had never experienced real consequences for his actions. This was Dmitri Sergeyevich Volkov, 26 years old, son of Ambassador Sergei Volkov, the Russian Federation's representative to the United States. Dmitri walked back toward the scene of impact. Michael Torres lay on the pavement, bleeding from multiple injuries, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Pedestrians who had witnessed the collision rushed to help, calling 911, trying to comfort the injured man. Dmitri stopped approximately 10 feet from Michael's body. He didn't kneel down. He didn't offer assistance. He didn't apologize or show concern. Instead, according to multiple witnesses, he pulled out his phone and appeared to take a photograph. Someone in the growing crowd shouted at him, "You hit him! Help him!" Dmitri looked at the crowd, looked back at Michael Torres lying bleeding on the pavement, then turned and walked back to his Mercedes. He got in, started the engine, and drove away, leaving an elementary school teacher bleeding in the street with what would later be diagnosed as a broken femur, 3 fractured ribs, internal bleeding, and traumatic brain injury. Within minutes, Providence police had identified the vehicle through traffic camera footage and traced it to the Russian embassy compound. Officers arrived at the embassy gates within 30 minutes of the collision. What they encountered there would demonstrate just how completely Dmitri Volkov misunderstood the protection afforded by diplomatic immunity, and just how far that misunderstanding would ultimately cost him. Officer Martinez's body camera captured the entire interaction at the Russian embassy gates. "Providence Police," Officer Martinez announced through the intercom. "I need to speak with the driver of a black Mercedes regarding a hit-and-run incident involving serious injury." Embassy security responded in accented English. "This is Russian sovereign territory. You cannot enter without diplomatic authorization." "I understand," Officer Martinez replied, maintaining professional composure. "I'm requesting the driver come out voluntarily to discuss what happened." There was a pause, then movement behind the ornate gates. Dmitri Volkov appeared, holding something prominently in his raised hand, a diplomatic passport bearing the golden seal of the Russian Federation. "Officer," Dmitri said, his voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone who had used this document before. "I am Dmitri Sergeyevich Volkov, son of Ambassador Sergei Volkov. This passport grants me diplomatic immunity under the Vienna Convention. I am not subject to arrest, prosecution, or even questioning without the express consent of the Russian Federation." Officer Martinez kept his voice level. "Sir, you were involved in a serious hit and run. A pedestrian was critically injured. You left the scene without rendering aid. I need you to come with me to the station to provide a statement." Dmitri's smile became condescending, the expression of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. "Officer, international law is very clear on this matter. I have complete immunity from your legal processes. You cannot arrest me. You cannot charge me. You cannot compel me to answer questions. This isn't arrogance. This is simply legal reality." "Sir," Officer Martinez said, his frustration beginning to show, "don't you want to explain what happened? Don't you care that someone was seriously hurt?" "Officer, many people are injured daily in traffic accidents. It is unfortunate, but my diplomatic status does not change based on the severity of any incident. I am protected by international treaties that your own government signed and ratified. These are not my rules. These are your government's rules. So, you're refusing to cooperate with the investigation?" "I am asserting my legal rights under international law," Dmitri corrected. "There is no investigation that can proceed against me. Your judge, your prosecutors, your entire legal system has no jurisdiction over my person. I could walk out onto that street right now, and you could not touch me. That is what diplomatic immunity means." Officer Martinez took a breath, trying a different approach. "Sir, a man is in the hospital with life-threatening injuries. He's a teacher. He has students who are worried about him. Don't you feel any responsibility for what happened?" Dmitri's voice became cold, stripped of even the pretense of sympathy. "Then perhaps that man should have been more careful crossing the street. I had the right of way. You ran a red light at 80 miles per hour. According to American police interpretations of American traffic laws, neither of which apply to me. I answer only to Russian law, and Russia has declined to waive my immunity. So, Officer Martinez, unless you want to create an international incident, I suggest you leave and inform your superiors that this matter is closed." "Sir, this isn't over," Dmitri actually laughed, a sound captured clearly on the body camera audio. "Officer, it never began. You have no authority here. Go tell your judge that Dmitri Volkov says hello, and that he can do nothing at all." The embassy gates closed. Officer Martinez stood there for a moment, body camera still recording, before returning to his patrol car to file a report that would ultimately reach Judge Frank Caprio's desk. Tuesday morning, 9:45 a.m., Providence Municipal Court was unusually crowded. Federal marshals stood in the gallery. State Department observers occupied the front row. Russian embassy representatives sat conspicuously on one side of the courtroom. The media presence was significant. This case had already generated substantial public interest. "The State of Rhode Island versus Dmitri Sergeyevich Volkov," the bailiff announced. Dmitri entered with 3 attorneys, led by Marcus Whitmore, an expensive international law specialist whose hourly rate exceeded most people's monthly rent. Dmitri wore a custom-tailored European suit, a Swiss watch visible beneath his French cuffs, and Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than Michael Torres's monthly teacher's salary. His expression conveyed absolute confidence. He had played this game before, in other cities, with other police officers. Diplomatic immunity had made every problem disappear. "Good morning, Mr. Volkov," Judge Frank Caprio said, looking up from the case file. "Good morning, Judge," Dmitri replied. "Not Your Honor, just Judge." A small but telling sign of disrespect. Judge Caprio noticed but maintained his composure. "Mr. Volkov, you're charged with reckless driving, leaving the scene of an accident involving serious injury, and failure to render aid. Before we proceed with substantive matters, I want to address the diplomatic immunity claim your attorneys have filed. Mr. Whitmore?" Marcus Whitmore stood, every inch the confident international lawyer. "Your Honor, my client is the son of Ambassador Sergei Volkov, the Russian Federation's representative to the United States. Under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, specifically Article 37, family members forming part of a diplomatic agent's household enjoy the same immunities and privileges as the agent. Therefore, this court lacks jurisdiction to proceed with any criminal prosecution. Judge Caprio reviewed the diplomatic passport that had been submitted into evidence. Mr. Whitmore, I'm familiar with the Vienna Convention. However, diplomatic immunity exists to facilitate diplomatic functions and international relations, not to shield criminal behavior from all consequences. With respect, Your Honor, the immunity provided under the Vienna Convention is comprehensive and does not include exceptions based on the severity of alleged offenses. My client cannot be prosecuted in American courts for any criminal matter without the express waiver of immunity by the sending state, in this case the Russian Federation. Dmitri leaned back in his chair, his posture radiating confidence. He knew exactly how this would end. Diplomatic immunity had protected him from consequences his entire adult life. Judge Caprio turned his attention to Dmitri directly. Mr. Volkov, do you understand the charges that have been filed against you? Dmitri's response was dismissive. I understand that your court believes it has charges to file, but as my attorney has explained, this is a jurisdictional issue. Under international law, you cannot prosecute me. This hearing, frankly, should not be happening at all. Mr. Volkov, a man was very seriously injured. You left him bleeding in the street. You don't think that warrants at least explaining what happened? Dmitri shrugged with practiced indifference. Judge, I certainly sympathize with Mr. Torres's injuries, but my status under international law is absolutely clear. This court has no legal authority to compel me to provide explanations or testimony. So you're invoking diplomatic immunity to avoid even explaining why you left an injured man on the pavement. I am asserting my legal rights under international treaty obligations that your government considers binding. There is a significant difference. The assistant prosecutor stood, her voice carrying controlled anger. Your Honor, the state disagrees with the defense's characterization. When a crime of this severity occurs, leaving the scene of an accident causing serious bodily harm, there are established mechanisms under both domestic and international law to challenge blanket assertions of immunity. Whitmore responded immediately. Diplomatic immunity can only be waived by the sending state. The Russian Federation has explicitly and formally refused to waive immunity in this matter. This court is therefore powerless to proceed. Dmitri, emboldened by his attorney's confidence, spoke up. Judge, perhaps we can end this proceeding now. You have no jurisdiction over me. This is settled international law. My father represents the Russian Federation as its official ambassador. I am protected by treaties your government considers legally binding. Can we conclude this matter? Judge Caprio's voice remained calm, but carried unmistakable authority. Mr. Volkov, before I make any determination regarding jurisdiction or immunity, I would like to review the evidence. Regardless of diplomatic status, understanding the facts of what occurred is important for this court's record. What happened next would systematically dismantle every claim Dmitri had made and expose the stunning callousness of his actions. The courtroom monitors flickered to life, displaying traffic camera footage from multiple angles. The timestamp read 3:47 p.m. The scene showed a busy Providence intersection during the after-school rush. Children were visible on sidewalks, walking home. The pedestrian crossing signal was clearly activated. Then the black Mercedes appeared, traveling at extraordinary speed. Even on video, the velocity was shocking. The vehicle didn't slow as it approached the red light, didn't even touch the brakes. It blew through the intersection at approximately 80 miles per hour. The impact was horrifying. Michael Torres, who had been crossing legally with the pedestrian signal, was struck with such force that his body was thrown 15 feet through the air before hitting the pavement with devastating impact. The Mercedes continued another 50 feet before stopping. Dmitri exited the vehicle. The camera captured him walking back toward Michael's body, which lay crumpled on the pavement, clearly injured. Pedestrians were already rushing to help, pulling out phones to call 911. Dmitri stopped approximately 10 feet from the injured man. He stood there for several seconds, clearly assessing the situation. Then, and this detail was clearly visible on the enhanced footage, he appeared to raise his phone and take a photograph. Someone in the growing crowd was visibly shouting at him, gesturing for him to help. Dmitri looked at the crowd, looked back at Michael Torres bleeding on the ground, then turned and walked back to his Mercedes. He got in and drove away, leaving the injured teacher in the street. The entire sequence, from impact to Dmitri's departure, took less than 90 seconds. Judge Caprio paused the video. The courtroom sat in absolute silence, the weight of what everyone had just witnessed settling like a physical presence. Dmitri, remarkably, appeared entirely comfortable. He examined his expensive watch, seemingly bored by the proceedings. "Mr. Volkov," Judge Caprio said, his voice carefully controlled. "That video shows you striking a pedestrian at extreme speed in a marked crosswalk, stopping briefly, observing the injured man, and then driving away without rendering any aid whatsoever. Is that an accurate summary?" Dmitri's attorney started to respond, but Dmitri raised his hand, indicating he would answer personally. "Judge, I was driving. There was an impact. I stopped to assess the situation. Other people were already calling for emergency services. There was nothing medical I could personally provide, so I departed. This type of incident is not considered criminal under Russian law." "We're not in Russia, Mr. Volkov." "No, but I am Russian. I am the son of a Russian ambassador. Russian law governs my conduct, even when I am physically on American soil. This is precisely what diplomatic immunity means." Judge Caprio then played Officer Martinez's body camera footage from the Russian embassy. The courtroom watched Dmitri's condescending explanation of diplomatic immunity, his dismissal of the injured victim, and, most damningly, his statement that Michael Torres should have been more careful crossing. When Dmitri said on the video, "Go tell your judge that Dmitri Volkov says hello, and that he can do nothing, nothing at all," several people in the gallery audibly gasped. Judge Caprio removed his glasses slowly, a gesture that everyone who knew him recognized as signaling deep thought and controlled anger. "Mr. Volkov, you just watched yourself hit a pedestrian at high speed, flee the scene and mock the investigating officer. You showed no remorse, no concern for the victim, no acceptance of responsibility. Is that an accurate characterization of your position?" Dmitri nodded confidently. "Yes, Judge. I am not subject to American law. Not because I am arrogant, but because international treaties explicitly say I am not. Your own government signed those treaties. So yes, I am outside your jurisdiction. This is legal fact, not opinion." Judge Caprio looked at the documentation before him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "Mr. Volkov, you're correct that diplomatic immunity is a serious and important legal doctrine protected by international treaties. However, you're fundamentally wrong about one critical thing." Dmitri's confidence wavered slightly. "What is that?" "You're wrong in thinking that immunity is the same as impunity. Diplomatic immunity exists to facilitate diplomatic relations between nations, not to allow diplomats or their family members to commit serious crimes with no consequences whatsoever." "Your Honor," Whitmore interjected, "the Vienna Convention does not include that distinction. The immunity is absolute." "Mr. Whitmore, I'm aware of what the Vienna Convention says. I'm also aware of what basic human decency and justice require." Judge Caprio turned back to Dmitri. "Mr. Volkov, do you know what happened to Michael Torres after you left him bleeding in the street? Dmitri shrugged with practiced indifference. I assume he received medical treatment at a hospital. Michael Torres is a 34-year-old elementary school teacher. He teaches 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary. He was walking home from work when you struck him at 80 miles per hour in a legal crosswalk. He suffered a broken femur, 3 fractured ribs, internal bleeding, and traumatic brain injury. He spent 2 weeks in intensive care fighting for his life. He will likely never walk without a limp. He may never be able to return to teaching. Standing for hours is now extremely painful for him. And you left him bleeding in the street while you drove to the Russian embassy to claim immunity. Dmitri's expression didn't change. This is unfortunate, Your Honor, but my diplomatic status means your court cannot hold me legally responsible. Judge Caprio's voice became very quiet. A tone that experienced court observers knew meant something significant was about to happen. Mr. Volkov, I've been on this bench for over 30 years. I've shown mercy to people who made mistakes and showed genuine remorse. I've given second chances to those who demonstrated they understood the harm they caused. But I have never, not once, seen someone use international law as a weapon to avoid basic human accountability for such serious harm. Judge Caprio picked up his phone. Please connect me to the United States Department of State, Office of Foreign Missions immediately. Tell them it's Judge Frank Caprio regarding a diplomatic immunity case requiring urgent review. The courtroom erupted. Dmitri's smile disappeared completely. His attorney looked genuinely shocked. Your Honor, Whitmore said, his voice rising, you cannot involve the State Department in a municipal court proceeding. This is highly irregular. Mr. Whitmore, when someone uses diplomatic immunity to avoid accountability for a hit-and-run that nearly killed an American citizen, when that person shows no remorse and mocks law enforcement, it becomes a matter of federal concern. The State Department has authority to review diplomatic immunity claims and can formally request waivers from sending states. Dmitri stood, his composure finally cracking. Judge, you cannot do this. This is interference with diplomatic relations. My father will file a formal protest with the State Department. Your father can file whatever protests he wishes, Mr. Volkov. But a man is in a hospital bed with permanent injuries because of your actions, and you've shown absolutely zero remorse. That demands action. Within minutes, Judge Caprio was connected to Deputy Assistant Secretary Catherine Morrison at the State Department's Office of Foreign Missions. The conversation was placed on speakerphone at the judge's request, making it part of the official court record. This is Secretary Morrison. A professional female voice came through clearly. Madam Secretary, this is Judge Frank Caprio from Providence Municipal Court. I have a diplomatic immunity case that I believe warrants State Department review and possible intervention. Over the next 10 minutes, Judge Caprio meticulously explained the hit-and-run, the severity of Michael Torres's injuries, Dmitri's complete lack of remorse, the disturbing video evidence, Russia's blanket refusal to waive immunity, and Dmitri's mocking of American law enforcement. Judge Caprio, Secretary Morrison said after a thoughtful pause, you're requesting that the United States government formally ask the Russian Federation to waive diplomatic immunity for Ambassador Volkov's son so he can face criminal prosecution in Rhode Island state courts. That's correct, Madam Secretary. This is highly unusual. The State Department generally doesn't intervene in local criminal matters unless there are truly extraordinary circumstances. Madam Secretary, a hit-and-run at 80 miles per hour that left a teacher with permanent injuries, followed by the perpetrator mocking law enforcement and showing no remorse while hiding behind diplomatic immunity. I would submit that constitutes extraordinary circumstances. There was a long pause. Judge Caprio, I'll be frank with you. Russia will almost certainly refuse any waiver request. They typically view such requests as affronts to their sovereignty. I understand that, Madam Secretary. But it's important to make the formal request regardless. If diplomatic immunity is going to shield Mr. Volkov from prosecution, It should only be after thorough review by the appropriate federal authorities, not simply accepted at face value in a municipal courtroom. Another pause. Longer this time. Give me 24 hours. I'll review all the evidence you've described, confer with colleagues in the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and if warranted, I will personally oversee the waiver request process. We'll also review whether Mr. Volkov's actions constitute abuse of diplomatic privileges under the Vienna Convention. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I appreciate your attention to this matter. Judge Caprio ended the call and looked directly at Dmitri. Mr. Volkov, this hearing is continued for 72 hours pending State Department review. You are not to leave the state of Rhode Island during that period. You cannot restrict my travel, Dmitri protested. My diplomatic status means I can travel freely within the United States and abroad. Mr. Whitmore, Judge Caprio addressed the attorney. If your client attempts to leave the country before this matter is resolved, I will request that his diplomatic passport be flagged at all ports of exit as part of a federal investigation into diplomatic immunity abuse. Dmitri went pale. This is outrageous. You have no authority to do this. Mr. Volkov, I have authority to bring potential abuse of diplomatic immunity to federal attention, which is exactly what I've done. Court is adjourned for 72 hours. Over the next 72 hours, the State Department conducted a thorough review. They examined all traffic camera footage frame by frame. They interviewed Michael Torres in his hospital room. They consulted with international law experts about the boundaries of diplomatic immunity and the circumstances under which it could be challenged. Then, they did something unprecedented. They formally requested that the Russian Federation waive diplomatic immunity for Dmitri Volkov for purposes of American criminal prosecution related to the hit-and-run incident. Russia initially refused, issuing a terse diplomatic note stating that the immunity was absolute and non-negotiable. But then, something unexpected happened. The story went viral. Footage of Dmitri hitting Michael Torres and then mocking Officer Martinez was shared millions of times across social media. Public outrage built rapidly. Congressional representatives began asking pointed questions about diplomatic immunity abuse. The Russian embassy received hundreds of protest calls from American citizens demanding accountability. International media coverage was uniformly negative, focusing on the image of a privileged diplomat's son using international law to escape consequences for nearly killing a schoolteacher. Then came the breakthrough, not from the Russian Foreign Ministry, but from Ambassador Sergei Volkov himself. 72 hours after the initial hearing, court reconvened. The gallery was even more crowded than before. Media presence had tripled. Federal marshals maintained tight security. But there was one additional person present who hadn't been there before. Ambassador Sergei Volkov, the distinguished man in his 60s, wearing a perfectly tailored diplomatic uniform with numerous medals and ribbons, approached the bench with the bearing of someone who had spent decades representing his nation with dignity. "Your Honor," he said in accented but perfect English, "I am Ambassador Sergei Volkov. I respectfully request permission to address the court." Judge Caprio, clearly surprised, nodded. "Ambassador Volkov, you're welcome to speak." "Your Honor, I have served the Russian Federation as a diplomat for 32 years. I have represented my country with honor in 8 nations across 4 continents. I have negotiated treaties, resolved disputes, and worked to maintain productive relations between Russia and many other nations." He paused, and his voice became heavy with emotion. "I have never been more ashamed than I am today." Dmitri, sitting at the defendant's table, looked at his father in shock. "I have watched the videos of my son's actions. I have read Mr. Torres's medical reports. I have seen my son mock American law enforcement and show absolutely no remorse for nearly killing an innocent man who was simply walking home from work." The ambassador's voice became firmer. more controlled. This is not the son I raised. This is not what Russian diplomacy stands for. This is not the behavior my country wishes to protect. He turned to look directly at Dmitri, his expression a mixture of disappointment and anger. Dmitri, you have dishonored me. You have dishonored Russia. You have dishonored the entire institution of diplomatic service. Diplomatic immunity exists to protect diplomats performing their official duties, not to shield criminal behavior or allow privileged individuals to harm innocent people without consequences. The ambassador pulled an official document from his briefcase. Your Honor, I personally deliver this communication from the Russian Foreign Ministry. After reviewing this case thoroughly, and at my personal request as the serving ambassador, the Russian Federation is voluntarily and formally waiving diplomatic immunity for my son for all purposes related to American prosecution of the hit-and-run incident. The courtroom exploded in gasps and shocked whispers. Dmitri jumped to his feet. Father, you cannot do this. You cannot. Ambassador Volkov's response was cold, his voice carrying the weight of profound disappointment. I am not ending your protection, Dmitri. You ended it when you hit that man and drove away, when you showed the world that you believe yourself above basic human decency. Russia does not protect criminals. We protect diplomats serving their country honorably. You are not a diplomat. You are a disgrace to our family and our nation. Judge Caprio accepted the waiver document, reviewing it carefully. Ambassador Volkov, this is unprecedented. Your integrity in this matter is remarkable and deeply appreciated. Your Honor, I have one more statement to make. Please proceed, Ambassador. Effective immediately, I am resigning as ambassador to the United States. I have served my country for over 3 decades with pride, but I cannot continue in this position after my son's actions have brought such shame to the office I hold. My letter of resignation has been delivered to Moscow and will be effective within the week. Ambassador, Judge Caprio said gently, that is not necessary. You are not responsible for your adult son's choices. It is necessary, Your Honor. My son used his connection to me to commit a serious crime and then attempt to avoid all accountability. That reflects on me. I failed as a father to teach him that privilege comes with responsibility, that power must be tempered with compassion, that protecting the weak is more important than shielding the powerful. Ambassador Volkov's voice became stronger, more passionate. I am ensuring my son faces the consequences he deserves, and I am accepting the consequences I deserve for raising someone who believed himself above basic human decency. With that, Ambassador Volkov turned and left the courtroom with dignity intact, leaving his son to face justice alone. Dmitri Volkov stood at the defendant's table, now without diplomatic immunity, without protection, without any shield between himself and the American legal system. Judge Caprio looked at him with an expression that mixed disappointment with resolve. Mr. Volkov, now that your diplomatic immunity has been formally waived by your own government, this court has full jurisdiction over these criminal charges. How do you plead to the charges of reckless driving, leaving the scene of an accident involving serious injury, and failure to render aid? Dmitri's attorney began to speak, but Dmitri raised his hand to stop him. No, Dmitri said quietly. No more lawyers. No more delays. He looked directly at Judge Caprio, for the first time with something resembling genuine emotion in his eyes. Guilty, Your Honor. I plead guilty to all charges. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. Mr. Volkov, I'm accepting your guilty plea. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything you wish to say to the court? Dmitri was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. To Mr. Torres, to his family, to everyone. I'm sorry. It was inadequate, insufficient, but it was the first time Dmitri had expressed any remorse at all. Judge Caprio delivered his sentence. Mr. Volkov, for the crime of leaving the scene of an accident causing serious bodily injury, I'm sentencing you to 2 years in a Rhode Island correctional facility. Additionally, you are fined $100,000 to be paid directly to Michael Torres for medical expenses and ongoing care. You are permanently banned from ever receiving diplomatic credentials or immunity in the future under any circumstances. Finally, upon completion of your sentence, you will be deported to Russia and permanently barred from re-entering the United States for any reason. Dmitri collapsed back into his chair. 2 years in prison, $100,000, permanent exile from America. His life of privilege was over. 3 months later, Michael Torres was released from the hospital. He walked with a cane now and would for the rest of his life, but he was alive. Against significant odds, he returned to teaching 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary. When asked by reporters about Dmitri's sentence, Michael said, "I'm not happy that anyone is in prison, but I'm grateful that justice works even when it has to cross international borders." Judge Caprio proved that no one, regardless of their diplomatic passport or family connections, is above basic human decency and accountability. Ambassador Volkov returned to Russia in honorable retirement. His 32-year diplomatic career ended not in disgrace, but with respect from colleagues worldwide who recognized the extraordinary courage it took to sacrifice his son's freedom and his own position for the sake of justice. 2 years later, Dmitri was released from Rhode Island's adult correctional institutions and deported to Russia, permanently barred from returning to America. But something had changed during those 2 years. The arrogance was gone. The entitled superiority had been replaced by something resembling humility. In Moscow, Dmitri began working with traffic safety organizations, speaking about the consequences of reckless driving and the limits of diplomatic protection. He volunteered with victims' rights groups, and he wrote a letter to Michael Torres. "Mr. Torres, I know you may never forgive me, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But because of Judge Caprio, my father, and the American justice system that refused to let me hide behind immunity, I finally understand what I took from you. I am spending the rest of my life trying to prevent others from making my mistakes and trying to become the man my father once believed I could be." Michael Torres never responded to the letter, but he kept it because it reminded him that justice, when it works properly, doesn't just punish. It has the potential to transform. The case of Dmitri Volkov became a landmark in discussions about diplomatic immunity, its appropriate boundaries, and the mechanisms for addressing its abuse. It taught several profound lessons. Diplomatic immunity has limits. While the Vienna Convention provides broad protection for diplomatic personnel and their families, the international community increasingly recognizes that immunity should not shield serious criminal conduct, particularly when it causes grave harm to innocent people. Courage comes in unexpected forms. Ambassador Volkov's decision to waive his son's immunity and resign his position demonstrated that true honor sometimes requires the hardest sacrifices, including holding your own family accountable. Justice requires persistence. Judge Caprio's refusal to simply accept diplomatic immunity at face value, his decision to involve the State Department, and his determination to pursue accountability all proved essential to achieving a just outcome. Privilege without responsibility is dangerous. Dmitri Volkov's story demonstrates what happens when privilege is never balanced with accountability, when power is never tempered with compassion, when someone grows up believing they're fundamentally above consequences. Transformation is possible. Even someone as entitled and callous as Dmitri showed the capacity for change when finally forced to confront the full weight of his actions and their consequences. The video of the court proceedings, Ambassador Volkov's powerful statement, and Judge Caprio's handling of the case has been viewed tens of millions of times worldwide. It sparked important conversations about diplomatic immunity, reform, traffic safety, and the importance of holding powerful people accountable regardless of their connections. Michael Torres continues teaching, inspiring his fourth-grade students not just with mathematics and reading, but with his example of resilience, forgiveness, and the belief that justice, though sometimes delayed, can ultimately prevail. And somewhere in Moscow, Dmitri Volkov continues his work with traffic safety organizations, living proof that accountability, though painful, can transform even the most privileged and entitled among us into something better. The case stands as a testament to the principle that in a just society, no one, regardless of their diplomatic passport, family connections, or international treaties, is truly above the law or beyond accountability when they cause serious harm to innocent people.